Nigeria's net external reserves hit an all-time low of $3.7 billion due to a combination of factors, including foreign exchange forwards, securities lending, currency swaps, and outstanding contracts. JP Morgan's report highlighted that this represents a significant decline from previous estimates. As of August 10, the country's external reserves stood at $33.88 billion, down from $37.08 billion at the previous year's end, as reported by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now, JP Morgan's estimate took into account FX forwards to accumulation of about $6.84 billion, securities lending, that's about $5.5 billion, and currency swaps to the tune of $21.3 billion. Now, this morning, Oladipo Ajayi, head fixed income and FX, Chapel Hill Denham Securities, joins me to talk about this. Thank you so much, Oladipo, for coming on the show.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on this morning.
JP Morgan estimates that Nigeria's forex reserve might not be more than $3 billion. So the first question that comes to mind is, how did it arrive at this estimate?
Well, what they did was simply adding in a reserve, an estimate of reserve. As last year, they did that was about 32.4 billion. So they added our special drawing rights with IMF of 5 billion, and that took us to about $37 billion. So what they now did was that they net out FX forward of about $6.84 billion. They also netted out the security lending obligation that's meant to actually crystallize within a year. That was around 5.5 billion. So now they also netted out the currency swaps between central bank and banks and commercial banks and like. So they accounted that to be about $21.3 billion. So that's totaling about $33.7 billion. So when you net that out of about $37.4 billion, that's how they came up about the $3.7 billion as that is mentioned as the current outstanding value of our reserve.
So what does this mean for the markets? And by extension, how will it impact the federal government's floating policy?
You see, there's a lot of things that, to me, sometimes is perceived. We get 2 wins, then we will, at the end of those 2 wins, the next thing is that we are having 5 losses. So it's like making progress and coming back, making progress and coming back. And exactly what I've been feeling about this revelation. Because remember vividly at the time, the FX in the parallel market crossed 900 levels, was already heading towards 8,000 to 1,000 naira to $1. But when the central bank make the pronouncement and they start seeing some of the policies, affecting borrowing by NNPC also helped the situation. And we saw that the rate actually crashed to around 8.3820 levels last week. But immediately this revelation came to the market. That's why yesterday we saw the parallel market hardly heading back up to 860, 870 levels. So it means that it's very negative for the market generally, and it also means that if the government is so much aware of this revelation, that wouldn't have actually told the line of harmonizing the exchange window just immediately. Because for me, I think if we have this kind of revelation, you would think twice before you actually want to harmonize the window. Because how would you want to harmonize the window when you know that the totality of your reserve is just 3.7? That's net reserve. And that is a big concern for the market. And I think the government needs to come out to actually give us a way forward. And I'm sure that's the only thing that can actually bring solace to the market as we speak.
Actually come up with different policies to stabilize the value of the naira to ensure that there's forex availability. And recently, NNPC announced that it signed a $3 billion deal with Afreximbank. And there are also talks about selling down the government stake in some of its assets with a $17 billion realization target. So when you look at these decisions, how would you say they've actually fared in solving Nigeria's forex and monetary crisis as it is?
You and I know that some of these things, they are short-term fixes, but it's not something that actually crystallizes just immediately. When you're looking at selling assets, it's not something you get to sell just immediately. And I think the lowest hanging fruit is the one that Afrexim Bank and the NNPC. And I think one way or the other, that's one way or the other, I've tried to actually help the market to actually stabilize. But I just feel that aside the immediate or short fixes, there are some things that we also need to show. As we are currently, we must have the short-term fix, we have to have medium-term fix, and we have to have long-term sustenance for the currency. It's not a time where we just look at quick fix and at the end of the day, any little exogenous factor that actually hit the market, then the currency will start another round of devaluation again. We must be able to look at it that, okay, what do we want to do to further reinforce the FX generation and also improve our reserve? And I think the easiest we can talk about currently is in the oil and gas sector. I feel that the government needs to actually focus on this sector as in, because every dollar now counts. It's not a time where you say, oh, oil theft is actually some of the reasons why we are not meeting our locations. We need to put all eyes on that to ensure that we are meeting our capacity. And we need to also assist most of these oil majors. What do they need to do? Or how can the government come to their aid to ensure that they are producing to capacity? Some of those things are things that we need to do so as to ensure that we have enough FX to meet our obligations.
But then, Oladipo, there have been talks about some people or elements within the NNPC or the oil and gas who are actually going about businesses to deliberately sabotage the government in terms of oil theft, the movement of crude from the shores or from the rigs to other countries or to other markets that are not actually designated for. So when we have this kind of internal sabotage within the sector, how do you expect the government to solve that or to be able to even meet up with its production capacity?
I think it has to be total overhaul of that ministry, and for me, I'm not against the president sitting as the minister of petroleum by himself, because to some extent he had some knowledge about that, because if you have worked in some of these oil majors, it means, and you have risen up to an executive level, shows that you have a great understanding of how that industry works. So I think the president on his part is already doing. I'm sure he would by now would have been doing all his own background check and background work and doing his own studies around that to ensure that they put that to rest. Because sincerely speaking, we can't continue in this line and expect Nigeria to actually get quick fix. It's not possible. And sometimes you hear stories of how the military caught ship actually conveying crude oil from Nigeria to another country in the Middle East. My question is that the only punishment is that that I've known so far is that what they will do is that they will burn the ship, and I don't think that's not enough. Because one thing about it, when you want to fix the problem, you look at the root cause of that problem. What you do is that you just cut the head and allow the roots to auto sprout again. That is not possible. We have to trace the issue to the end. Who are those people behind this thing? And those people behind those things, you must bring them to book. You must make them like an example to other people that may actually be thinking of perpetrating such atrocious issue in the country. I feel that the government needs to look at it critically. What do we need to do to actually bring some of these things, people to book? And what are the controls that we have in place that have given room for people to actually be able to circumvent those controls, and that is leading to us losing sizable inflow of FX revenue that would have come into our book. We must look at that. Let's really check all the process from beginning to the end again and see where those loopholes are and see how we can actually cover those loopholes. And I also think that I don't see the reason why the Air Force cannot work with the naval guys when it comes to issues like this, where you have a surveillance helicopter actually monitoring that zone that is parading daily to ensure that no one is loading crude oil that does not have the right to. With some of those things, we can actually bring and reduce this thing to the barest minimum, and that will help us to actually continue to meet our production allocation. And at the end of the day, that will improve the level of the reserve, the value we have in our reserve.
Let's now talk about CBN's intervention so far. The MPC raised the NPR, floated the Naira, and made a tax, suspended the Naira for dollar scheme, introduced the willing buyer, willing seller model at the I&E window, and we know currently obtains with the fuel subsidy and other measures being put in place by the Apex Bank. How effective have these been? Can they actually get Nigeria out of the doldrums and probably improve the country's reserve?
Yes, I think they are currently doing that already. Imagine that we're still paying subsidy. Imagine that this half of the year, we still need to cough out close to 4 trillion to actually pay subsidy. Imagine that, and into a country that is total reserve is just about $3.7 billion. And if you know critically, for some times now, even NPC has not been remitting to the federal federation account. And their complaint has always been that whatever comes in as the inflow is exactly what they are using to actually fund, to bring a refined product. But with this, they don't have any excuse again because the country is not bearing the burden of subsidy again. So the subsidy, sincerely speaking, is one of the right decisions we are taking. It might be a hard one, but I tell you, it's one of the right decisions that we need to take at such a time like this. Because, okay, imagine, let's say for example, you are spending close to 6 trillion subsidy in a year, and at the end of the day, what you do is that pure consumption, and consumption, people just consume that 6 trillion in a year, and at the same time, there's some people that are actually also benefiting indirectly or directly from it, maybe as a result of over reporting the volume of importation or something like that, and that is gone. Imagine now you having that 6 trillion to actually channel into development of the country. Imagine you have budgeting additional 1 trillion to the health sector, additional 1 trillion to infrastructure, 2 trillion to infrastructural development, 1 trillion to education. You can see that people will benefit better than just consuming those things. And I must tell you, that's one of the best decisions that we have made. But when you look at the FX harmonization, I'm very sure that if the current government, if they are actually so aware that this is the real status of things, maybe they would have thought twice before actually going that route. Because as we have now currently, we don't have as much power to defend the currency as we speak, speaking. As we speak, the government needs to do more to actually find a way to actually ameliorate the issue. But the story, one of the stories is that despite that, even the $21 million swap that we're talking about is not something that will mature just immediately. It's something that you can roll over, pending when you get to actually get your reserve stabilized. So I don't think it's all doomed for Nigeria in that regard. So I think that some of this policy they are the best policy that you could have had at such a time like this. And also in terms of the inflationary pressure, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Apex Bank has actually retraced their step in that regard. Before now, we get to a situation whereby liquidity is actually sitting idle in the system. And as a result, that's one of the things that was putting pressure on FX in the private market. And at the same time, was dropping the rates of investment return in the market. But with the change of trajectory by the central bank, we're seeing more situation whereby they decide to tighten up the economy and also push return on investment up. So what that will do is that we lure people to actually invest in instruments in Nigeria. So that is also a plus for me, and I think that the central bank also need to further reinforce that so as to ensure that investment is actually very rewarding and also is commensurate with the level of risk that investors are likely to take.
Let's also look at this. In some quarters, Oladipo, it is believed that the demand for the greenback in Nigeria is unnecessarily high. And I've also asked that measures be taken to reduce that demand. So what sort of measures should we be looking at here?
So come again. I didn't hear you clearly with that question.
All right. So we talked about. All right. So we talked about what is being said in some quarters or by a school of thought. They believe that the demand for the greenback in Nigeria is relatively high, and that should be stemmed or controlled or reduced. So if that would happen, what would be your take, and in what measure? How do you think that can be done?
Precisely speaking, you and I know that the demand for the greenbacks is actually very high in Nigeria, and I think that the central bank needs to rise up to that challenges and also find a way to actually re-educate people of the impacts of that. If you look at there are some institutions that what they collect, correct, they still collect dollars as a method of paying for a tuition fee, and they are domiciled in this country. And you have hospitals that you only pay them in dollars. You have people that render services and collect dollar in an naira environment. And I think a lot of people don't have good understanding of the impact of some of these things. What you are doing is that every time you buy dollar, every time you sell naira to buy dollar, you are pushing dollar down and you are pulling dollar up. And it's not the best way for you to actually grow up an economy. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so much concerned about sentiments in the market. You don't give a wrong sentiment that will continue to push people to want to hold dollar rather than having naira. And sincerely speaking, and that's where we have found ourselves. Most people that are currently holding dollars in their books, they are not even in need of the dollar now. There are more people that are speculating on the currency. And sincerely speaking, and most times you will not blame people for actually throwing that around. Imagine you are here maybe sometime last year when in this country sometime last year when the currency was about 500 or something, and by now so we are already getting closer to 1,000. So it means that the currency has actually depreciated close to 2 times of the value as last year. And most people, their income has not increased. And at the same time, the return on investment. Okay, for me, if I have put more the money in investment, am I sure I would have gotten a return that will compensate for the level of depreciation in the currency? And those are some of the reasons that is actually pushing a lot of people to actually speculate on the currency. And we must work on improving the sentiments in the market so that people will be comfortable to hold the naira at the expense of the greenback. I sincerely feel that we need to also, the government needs to talk more about this to actually ensure that people are not actually paying for services or paying for goods in this country with dollars.
Let's quickly wrap up this way. Moody's Investor Service published a note saying that some of the loans taken by the Apex Bank might have been used to boost the nation's foreign exchange reserves. Is that a logical route to take? I just need your response in about a minute. Should we even be worried when we have actions or inactions like this?
For me, I don't think we should do that, and I don't think that's the best way. Why are we posting ourselves as strong in terms of our level of result when we don't have as much of that? Now all cards are on the table. We know the real true picture, and from there will now be so much conscious about growing the economy and finding a way to actually improve exportation of products so as to improve our reserve. I just feel that when you borrow to actually cushion the effect, improve the value in your reserve, I don't think is the best way to actually grow a reserve, because those things just that you are borrowing, and the obligation we have to be reversed at a point in time, and that's when you need to repay, and that's where we have found ourselves now. I'm sure some of these decisions were taken when reserve was not of 40 billion, but now that we are down to about 30-something billion, that's where most of these obligations are crystallizing, and that's one of the reasons why we are now at 3.7 billions. If you have seen the true picture before now, of course, it will help us to make the right decision at any point in time.
Oladipo Ajayi, Head, Fixed Income and FX, Chapel Hill, Denham Securities. We thank you so much for your time on the show.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome.